Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iterate, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy. All right, welcome everybody to the Lights Out Podcast. We are back as usual. You can see the usual suspects right here. I don't even need to say their names, but we have a special guest this time. The 50 Fight Club. These are people who have been in mixed martial art and had more than 50 fights. We have our first person, Brian Ebersole. Brian, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, good. It's just morning over here in Australia. You caught me at a good time. I've got a coffee and I'm ready to rock it.
Right.
Awesome. And I know, Brian. Good to see you again. Good to talk again. It's been a long time, but I know you've been in Australia for a long time. So before we get into the old school stuff and the history, tell us a little bit about what's going on in Australia. I know you're there at least over a decade at this point. So give us a little bit of the scoop, because that means to me, guys like Whitaker, Adesanya, and you can go back. They got a scene down there. You probably knew that ahead of us.
Yeah. So first time I was here was 2006, fighting for XFC under Justin Lawrence. So XFC now is the longest continuous running MMA show in Australia. And I can bring this whole thing full circle. We can end the interview now. I started fighting with them, and now I matchmake for that show.
Nice.
Now, XFC is on to its next owner. Justin Lawrence has sold the show and retired. But he's still, in my ear, and we chat, and he knows what's going on. And the biggest compliment that I can get is, he knows it's in good hands now. He always said, making fair fights and taking care of the athletes was his number one job. And then obviously selling tickets comes a very, very close second, because if you don't sell tickets, you can't run the next show. So yeah, huge compliment there. I haven't had any mismatches in the 5 shows that I've put together so far. So knock on wood that streak continues, and I get to help, kind of create a platform for the amateurs and some of the pros that are going to go places. But yeah, in the last 12 years, it's been really no surprise to me, watching some of the talent come up, gathering the skill sets from around the world. And I'd like to think I helped with the wrestling side of things in the time I've been here, even just open some eyes and have the fights that I did and show the importance of being able to control a fight from standing to the ground. But man, some of these guys have really, risen above and beyond what you would think based on, what their coaches did and stuff like that. I mean, you've got a lot of guys right now, Alex Volkanovski, training, with a guy that hadn't had a ton of fights or anything. He's just done his thing, Mm-hmm. So it's a really cool country with a lot of really good athletes. And yeah, the coaching has really absorbed a lot of the knowledge from around the world and done the right thing by their athletes. So yeah, now it's on the map. It might get a bit harder, guys, start shooting for us and expecting something from these Australians now.
Well, you said you bought the wrestling. When you got down there, did you find like they were more advanced in like boxing? Because I always think of them as like, the British, like, tree. And then it was like outlaw country for the Brits. So like a lot of like rugged British guys wound up over there. And it's like, it's known as a hard land. Yeah, exactly. So I that tradition of like settling things and stuff like that. And then you go back to like, 1908 and you had Jack Johnson fighting for the world title in Australia. That wasn't in the United States that the first black man won a heavyweight boxing title. It was in Australia. So it seems like they've always supported this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a lot going on here. Like, they have a really good boxing scene. There's definitely the rough and tumble, rugged, like Aussie bloke thing going on. I mean, they play rugby and they love it. They play both codes as well, where I've only really seen rugby union in the US, but they play a version over here that's a bit faster called league. And then they have a huge Muay Thai culture. So there are a lot of those little pyramid triangles sitting on the back of people's shoulders and necks, and on their chests, indicating that they've went to Thailand and been, tattooed by a monk or a priest. But yeah, there's some really, really talented guys. Like John Wayne Parr is the biggest, easiest name to recognize. But you've had like Nathan Corbett and plenty of other guys that run that Contender Series with with John Wayne Parr that have done really well. So it's a very, very striking-oriented country. There weren't that many black belts when I first arrived. After my first couple of years here, there was a bit of an influx in Brazilian black belts traveling over, getting their permanent residency or working class visas and kind of settling here. So there's kind of a beach vibe that they really enjoy and a very, very captive market for them because it was a lot of blue and purple belts teaching, you know, and those guys were struggling to get their purple belts by flying over, you know, really talented BJJ guys to do an annual seminar and maybe stay for an extra couple of days to train that head instructor and help him with his next bit of progress. But you're paying for that guy $5-6 grand to come over every year. That's a tough way to get a purple belt, you know? So, and then now with the wrestling, being able to come over here, they have a wrestling scene, but it's not very big. And it's the Olympic styles, which they don't favor control quite as much as folk style American schoolboy wrestling does. You know, you can double leg someone in the Olympic styles and the guy falling to his back can wrap the waist and do a back roll and flip the guy over. And the guy that got double legged gets 2 points. Well, both guys stand up and no one's in control, but it's 2-0 somehow. And same with some of the big 5-point moves. Like I can turn my back and like judo throw you and send you across the mat. You do a front roll and stand up. No one's on top, but I'm up like 5-0.
Wow.
It's cool for sport, but it's not quite combative. So to be able to bring over the folk style wrestling here and guys had to game plan for me. Guys had to study that whole skill set. And it was obviously on the UFC, like from the early days of the Mark Coleman's and all that, holding people down and pounding them. So it was a valued skill set, but sometimes people didn't know how to go about it until it's right in front of their face, and then they can start to absorb and steal and train for and from that style.
Let me ask you. Go ahead, Chris.
I would say the folk style definitely translate way better for MMA and like jiu-jitsu. It just seems like it's really the same thing, just different moves, folks. I mean, you get the same mat feel. You don't get that from freestyle or Greco or whatever. That's all takedown based, but I mean, you got to know how to control the guy on the mat once you get there, you know? So
yeah, you get penalized too much in freestyle freestyle and Greco for trying to avoid the takedown because there's a huge difference in back points in folk style. You have to hold me on my back for 2 or 3 seconds, but I also have an indication from the referee that he's saying I'm on my back at the moment. Where in the freestyle, just a quick roll, like you can front headlock someone in gator roll and get 2 points.
You can keep doing it and win 10-0 and game's over sometimes.
That's it. So without control. So it's really hard for guys in the freestyle and Greco to go ahead and scramble and fight almost like a jiu-jitsu style, you know what I mean? Scramble where they're half on their back, half on their side, still not quite under control, but you don't want to, you give up the 1 point instead of 4 or 5. So most people just belly down. Where folk style, you know, you can play that game a lot more. Guys like Ben Askren with their funky style wrestling and their scrambles and passing the leg over their head and getting awkward. So yeah, you're right. It is folk style and jiu-jitsu mesh up a lot more than the Olympic styles, which are just really explosive.
All right, Coach. Yeah, easy, Coach.
Here we go.
but that's good stuff. But let me ask you now. So we're a little bit about the Australian scene. I'm a little bit of a historian nowadays, I guess. And the very first Australian dude I remember kind of affecting MMA.
Trevor
I know it's coming.
Who?
I know it's coming.
Trevor Frank.
No.
Elvis
No, he's South African.
No. All right, you guys are youngsters.
Who have we got?
It's a black belt under Gene LaBelle named John Donahue, who was the referee for John Peretti's show. He was very close to John Peretti, and he was later a judge with Abu Dhabi and stuff. He was a quality referee. Like I don't, you know, I know he was a black belt, and I know, you know, being around him and stuff, but I never saw him compete or anything. He was known as a referee, but he was the first guy that really impacted. And then when he was one of the judges at Abu Dhabi, I thought that, you know, he kind of disappeared after that. I could tell you there was a guy we tried to bring over from Australia who was a wrestler-based guy that just seemed like, you know, checked off all the boxes, a guy named Chris Brown. And I bought a plane ticket for him to come to the United States, and Chris had beat up somebody when he was young, and he couldn't get in the country. And I lost the plane ticket, but
he's a 5-time Olympian.
They wanted to match that guy up against. I mean, I tried to match him against Renzo Gracie. So I know Australia had MMA. You know what I mean? There were always people interested, but Donahue was the first guy I had contact with. I have a lot of respect for him. I consider him an old friend.
Yeah, so John's over in Melbourne, and so is Chris. Both have their own gyms. I've matched some of Chris's guys and had the pleasure of meeting him and having him corner guys. But you're right. He did have some legal trouble that caused him issues getting out of the country. He's a 5-time Olympian, highly touted, well-renowned.
Jesus.
And he did it in a time when it was just toughness. You know what I mean? It would have been toughness and
he was one hard dude, man. He was one
over
hard
that
dude.
many years. I don't care what country you come from. That's hard work.
I always remember
that accent just makes him tough.
I just remember the Australian guys being known as really tough guys and tough fighters. I remember Jason Gossie telling me the time when he had the guys over in Pancrase and they brought their Australian, team. There's like 3 or 4 of them. And one of them got picked up and like suplex and dislocated his shoulder.
There was Chris Hazeman too from back then.
Putting spice on it. And the guy's like, "Come on, we're going out." He's like, "I separated my shoulder." I was like, "You pussy, come on." And he was going off on him. Shamed him into going out and drinking a Rapungi that night. So I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a story of Jamie Tahuna fought Hector Lombard.
Oh yeah.
And Jamie's shoulder came undone, and the ref allowed him to go back and have his corner snap his shoulder back in place, and he went out and finished the fight.
Jesus. All right. So, Brian, what we're doing is like a 50 fight club. And what we like to do is we should try to take like a deep dive into people's careers because there's a lot.
Yeah.
No matter where.
You've got to have me on twice because I've had a lot of fights.
You have. But
just to be clear, before I give it the floor over
Miguel, you got to give me a minute, dude.
I'm just going to say Ebersole, 51 wins, 18 losses, 1 draw, 1 no contest per Sherdog. So he's coming up on 70 fights. Go, Mike.
Okay, so we got this is almost 70 fight club at this point. So your first recorded fight is Chris Albania. And it was a total fight challenge here at the Hammond Civic Center, I believe. And I think that's where I may have first met you. It was like right around the year 2000. Was that your actual first fight, or was that just your first one on record?
That was might even have been my second loss. So it wasn't my first fight. So I started out 4-0, fighting mostly at Finkeys, as we had a brief moment before and had a bit of a chat about. I fought like an outdoor event for that same promoter, Braulio Corral, as well, and won a fight with a guy that had to like wear his jockstrap on the outside of shorts that I loaned him because he didn't have shorts. Okay. And I lost to Jay Mask my first fight by armbar. And then I lost a decision to Chris Albania, who was the first wrestler I fought. So I knew it was going to be a different fight than the 5 I had before. And he went on to do some really good things. And I think he's still a wrestling coach up in like the Evergreen Park, Illinois area.
Yeah, he was. Those Finkeys fights, you brought it up. They're like, it's kind of like one of my favorite like venues here.
It was cool.
Are you aware of what happened to that bar in Indiana?
No. I'd be interested. No, it was a cool place. I remember like the ring was on a dance floor and you could go upstairs on a mezzanine and look down on the ring.
So this is the same place that Miguel Torres. Yeah, Miguel Torres cut his teeth at Finkeys as well. So it's kind of
money together. Yep.
The Wisniewskis as well. Like there was a lot of bad boys stepped into that place.
Joe and John Pawn, 2 stud wrestlers from Illinois.
Can I ask you a question? Was that a location where when you were fighting, there was actually a guy doing play-by-play over the mic?
The promoter.
Okay, so I've seen video. I know it. I've seen videos of the Wisniewskis and stuff on that, and they actually it was like kind of ridiculous because play-by-play live, not too many people tried that, but I always remember, man, the fights are good.
We had some talented kids. It was just an outlet for all of us wrestlers that had nowhere to go. Yeah. I can't speak from the other side, like how the Kempo karate guys or Shudokan or, whatever other styles got there. But I know for a lot of us wrestlers, it was just kind of a thing to do at the time. Like we were done wrestling, nowhere else to wrestle. That sounds fun.
Essentially, It was the owner and his son. The son ran it. And the son would from what I understand, had some issues. And those issues, there we go. those
issues that required tissues.
That issue had that bar burned completely to the ground under some like mysterious circumstances. I think maybe lightning hit it, spontaneous combustion.
Hey, they had their insurance papers though, didn't they?
So yeah, it's no good. That place is no good. Wow. All right, so some of the guys that you fought that are in the 50 Fight Club, one of them is Adrian Serrano.
Yep.
Could you expand on your fight with
dude?
Adrian?
He's an awesome dude. Like, I would see him at other shows, and just my eyes would light up. Like, I'd get the tingles. I'd be in awe because I knew he was in the UFC. You know what I mean? Like, it was so cool to have him on shows, knowing he had that many fights, and getting around the local scene. So it's one of them ones, like, by the time I got out of Illinois and I fought other places, like, guys like him being around sort of helped me not feel starstruck in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, it just didn't feel that unattainable. Like, when you're already around normal guys that have sort of done the grind and got there, and to know, like, okay, well, my path can lead me to that same place. You know, so it was really neat. And then obviously I wrestled with Matt Hughes, but, like, I was starstruck by Matt because he was on such another level. Like, he was such an incredible athlete. I mean, I would have needed a frying pan and a head start to beat him. That would have been my one path to victory, would be hitting him from behind with a frying pan. You know, so I did feel there was a separation there. But then, you know, by the time I got to leave, and I was like, well, Tito Ortiz is a junior college wrestler. He was like the next big name that I met. And I was like, well, gosh, he's the champ, but, like, I wrestled at a pretty good level too. Like, I can get there. So yeah, like guys like Adrian Serrano and Jeremy Horn being around. And again, he was carrying fights into second round just to be nice to promoters at the time. Like, he wasn't even trying to win fights fast. I was like, what control? Like, I mean, that's studly to go out there and bypass a submission or let a guy sweep you from mount and just hold him in guard and go, yeah, okay, I'll just do this next round. No big deal. You're welcome, promoter. You got your main events times, you know, in the ring, as opposed to a 30-second submission. But being able to be around those guys, like physically be around them and not just see them on TV and then feel like they're Michael Jordan when you meet them, was a big help. Yeah.
Did you come down to Evansville with Fitch?
I fought in like a Harrah's casino or something.
Okay.
A couple times. I fought in Kokomo, Indiana. Me and John traveled a bit. Evansville, probably. I brought John up to Brad Kohler, I think 2 or 3 times. I brought Mike and Clay French up that way as well. I know Mike fought. I'm not sure if Clay fought on those, but I know Mike, his older brother, did. Clay was a kid that wrestled at my college and that fought in Japan, and like fought Sine Kitaoka and a couple other really high-level guys. Like I said, Eastern Illinois, you know, coming out of that college, just a rough and tumble room, as we were talking about earlier, produced a lot of like high-level guys. UFC, nice. Bellator. We have a PFL champion that's come out of there. Also,
right, so let's talk about Eastern Illinois, because when you were there, they actually discontinued the wrestling program.
Just after I left.
Okay, just after you left.
Yeah.
But whoever was recruiting for that program, it was like a who's who in MMA.
But we were just like the leftover rough and tumble kids out of Illinois high school wrestling. Like, we were the guys that couldn't go to Illinois. And
okay,
you know, be a starter. We were the guys that couldn't go to Iowa State.
Let's go through the names. Matt Hughes.
Yep.
What, Mike Russo?
Yep.
Okay, who obviously multiple-time UFC veteran. Then you had both French brothers. Am I correct?
Yep.
Who else was there? Yourself. That's 5.
Kenny Robertson.
Kenny Robertson. Oh, I forgot about it. He was in the UFC a couple times. Kenny Robertson is a stud.
Matt Veach.
Matt Veach, too? I thought he was from Indiana. Yeah.
Oh, well, he might have been from Indiana, but he came through us.
Holy
Lewis
cow.
Taylor.
Lewis Taylor was there.
$1 million champion. He was my roommate. We used to play table tennis to warm up for like half an hour a day. In our sweats, and then have our sweat, and then go down to the wrestling room, because fuck hitting a double leg cold. You know what I mean? Like, we were warm, we were ready to go after some table tennis. But there would have been 4 or 5 more. I had a random kid named Kevin Nabjan Miguel might remember this kid.
Yeah, I know who he is.
He was just some random kid. I loved him to death, and I'm sad that I lost contact with him because I really enjoyed the kid.
He's on the department now. He's on the police department.
I believe it. Yeah, he was a great kid. And his freshman year, he found me somehow. I was just training martial arts and trying to fight and do my thing because I was kicked off the wrestling team my third year. So I had to have something to do for my sanity and keep my athleticism, going and self-worth, all that stuff, right? So he ended up training with me just in random dojos and sometimes in the wrestling room until the coach kind of told me I couldn't go in there anymore, even on the off hours. So, he ended up fighting in Bellator and a couple other pretty big shows.
Yeah, WEC.
So I had a roommate that fought Tim Sylvia and the late Justin Eilers both, and had them both, and had Sylvia in trouble. He couldn't touch Eilers. Eilers about killed him. But I mean, we had just some random dudes. Jim Theobald, Chris, you'll know that name.
I remember him. Jeez,
he wrestled at.
He was at my college, just walking around like a badass mystery dude. Like, didn't wrestle, didn't do this, didn't do that, but he was just a badass dude.
I used him to break in Rogerio Nogueira. He was Nogueira's first fight in the States.
That's right.
Really?
So he reminds me of it. He could have been a Jeremy Horn.
Yeah,
he was that kind of athlete and that kind of guy.
He was a
bit
guy
more athletic.
Yeah,
but I never got to train with him.
Yeah, the problem with him
I was still wrestling
in MMA was money because he was the kind of guy that was a draw in Chicago, so he got paid more than I was going to pay him, to come to Indiana. I had a sponsor to make a big fight, so I got him once, and he was very, very easy to work with.
Oh, he's a sweetheart.
Gave everything in the fight, and he was no sweat, no problem. But he was like old school, like local fighter guy,
Yeah, he had to leave the fight game because he got on the fire department.
They wouldn't let him fight. I thought
all this nitty gritty stuff, like Brian, we get like real nerdy on this podcast, and it's like it's really not for beginners, but like we don't care, it is what it is. All right, so you had mentioned my favorite promoter of all time, Brad Kohler.
I knew it was Brad Kohler.
So there had to have been some all-star
moments.
Your
sarcasm is strong, Mike. I mean,
no, that's my favorite.
I've been living in Australia this long, and I've always said, like, sarcasm's an American sport.
I can tell you this. What's going to happen here is Brian doesn't like Kohler, and Mike likes Kohler for the same reason. So I'll let you guys tell the story.
Did I give my position away already?
Tell us your story, Brian.
In your hands.
Yeah, let's hear a story about Kohler.
Let's hear it.
Your experience.
So the first time I fought for Brad was all okay, right? We show up, we drive the 9 hours up, to the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, from Eastern Illinois University, and he's actually like after the weigh-in, we found him at like a local diner. Could have been at Denny's, right? So just something basic, and he bought our meal. $25. He covered me and my corner man, which was cool. Fought for him X amount of times, didn't make much money, but again, we didn't sell tickets up there, so it's okay. That said, my opponent always changed. So I always fought someone different when I got there. Right? First, it was you're fighting this guy from Nebraska, and I'm like, well, that's okay, whatever. And then I get there and I'm fighting a local. You know what I mean? Of course I am. Yeah. Who else is going to sell tickets? Why would I be fighting a guy from Nebraska then? Why would you even put the fight on and give us $500 that doesn't need to be done when we net zero sales between us?
Yeah.
So I started catching on, no big deal, just showed up ready all the time. I took one loss on a show. I fought Kerry Shaw, and I went for like a knee bar. Like I rolled upside down for a knee bar from guard just because I learned it like 2 weeks before, and tried it. And then he got onto my leg, and I'm like, yeah, I've already had surgery on that leg. I tapped. I wish I'd have fought different. Obviously, I think had I taken him down, it would have been a different story. But fun, right?
Was it? Yeah, Kerry Shaw's a heavyweight.
Yeah, I was at 190 pounds. He's made me fight heavyweight. Like I said, I
fought he was about
whoever he put in front of me.
Yeah, no, they were way big. He was way.
He was by 250.
He was 300 and some pounds. He was a monster.
I was gonna say, he was huge. Meat truck was his nickname.
Yep, but whatever. That was the time we were in.
It's 50 Fight Club. It is what it is.
When you were above 185 pounds, you knew what you were in for back then. Like you could fight anyone, and I was 6 foot, so it wasn't like I could be 5'4" and like, no, come on, man, like. So it was a bit of a go, but the one that got me is I brought up a guy that had fought Tim Sylvia. And we were both chatting about pay, this and that. And he's like, well, this one's going to be on the pay-per-view. We're going to put this one on the internet on pay-per-view. He goes, I'll give you guys blah, blah, blah percentage of the pay-per-view. And of course, listen, we don't want to get no bigger. I go, listen, just take care of us. We don't care. Like, that's fine. Right? Pay us after the show, whatever. Well, we get up there, and everyone else knew it wasn't going on pay-per-view. So I was like, Brad, like, he's like, oh, no, when the pay-per-view sells, I'll pay, it'll like be like 2 months, you know, like let me have 2 months to sell the pay-per-view. I go, well, everyone's saying there is no pay-per-view. Oh, what do they know? Oh. I'm like, mate, just give us our $250 and we'll go home. Like usual, who cares? And he threw a big fit, you know what I mean? So phone calls and all the mess for a couple of weeks. And sure enough, there was never a pay-per-view, never a link, never a buy-in for my family to pitch in so I can get 1% of it. And so that put me off him, and he never called back. Like, he knew he burned the bridge. But amongst all this, I heard the story of him faking his own heart attack to leave one of the shows so he didn't have to pay people. And I heard about 6 more stories along the same lines, and I just left it there.
So my favorite was like 2 years ago. He found some money guy. I don't know.
He's made a product. I ran into him in New Jersey for the autograph guy. And he was at this show, like, doing this boxing bag number product thing.
Yeah, like you got to go 153. All right, so he got this money guy, convinced him to do a pay-per-view, and these are his descriptions, not my own. These Asians and Germans love watching men beat up women. We're going to do an intergender match, and it's going to be in Russia. But the thing is, everybody involved had to check in on Facebook, pretending they were on a flight to Russia, and they would just drive to Michigan and do it in a warehouse. And everybody knew. The athletic commission got involved. They stopped it. Everybody that was, like, even entertained the idea of going out there and getting involved in this, like, got big, like Shannon Ritch, one of your buddies.
Shannon wouldn't go do something like that, would he?
Maybe he actually went to Russia, but his body was in Michigan.
Add acting to his resume.
Yeah. So you fought Shannon 3 times.
Twice.
Twice? Do you care to delve into any of those fights?
I'd be happy to. It's how I met my wife. No problem. Can we pause, though? I need to put my phone on charge.
Yes.
Yep. It's just this Zoom stuff's it's draining my battery and all this knowledge. My phone, this is more than Wikipedia.
Oh, shit.
Elvis Sinisic, you guys should be embarrassed of yourself.
That's the first guy from Australia that did anything for real. Come on, man. He submitted Jeremy Horn, and that put Australia on the map. You know that. UFC-wise.
Well, yeah. I'm gonna look up Chris Haseman, because Chris Haseman, I don't like. There was a team of guys before that. Hold on, man.
But as far as like real like as far as UFC mainstream knowledge, that was the first guy people would have ever heard of.
Okay,
I'll tell you.
Haseman lost to Horn, but he beat Carlos Barreto. He beat Joe Slick. This is all in rings. He actually came to Rings and did Rings USA. Took Hughes to a unanimous decision. He was a rings guy. That's where he came from.
Well, the biggest badass, the first original badass.
He fought Murillo Bustamante.
Is Jem Mace, bare knuckle boxer, turn of the century, arguably boxing's first world champion. He's got a book called like The Ringmaster. It's like that thick.
Really?
Literally a Netflix special should be done about this guy, and it would probably be about 5 or 6 seasons. One of the most, if I had to like pinpoint like a bare knuckle or combat sports guy that may have came from the future and went to the past, Jem Mace is absolutely at the top of that list. Yes.
Like if to give props to Australia, since hopefully we'll have a couple of Australians listening to this. You want to delve into boxing history? There's a legendary guy named Les Darcy that, if I'm not mistaken, he came to the United States and died in the United States. before he could do anything. But he was supposed to be the real deal, and a lot of people who saw him spar.
Wait a minute. Wait. Didn't he get like a tooth infection or something like that? And then he just never made it out of the hospital. That guy, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of there's a lot of stories about it.
You're talking like 1910, 1915, baby.
Yeah.
Chris Lytle, what you know about that?
Oh, I'm learning, baby. Tooth infection back then, they killed him. They killed them off. I'm not stupid.
To death.
Hey, just like General Patton, they killed him off, man. They didn't want him going and causing a little car accident, a little Jeep accident. He died. Come on.
Yeah. And you know, the Titanic, it wasn't explosives that was in there, even though like 5 or 6 of the wealthiest families in the world that controlled pretty much the entire world were on that boat all at the same time. It was an iceberg. It wasn't explosives.
All right, now
did I walk into a conspiracy theory chat?
Of course, well, that's all we do.
How ironic we went from Shannon Ritch to conspiracy.
Well, let's talk about the Shannon Ritch thing, because like, how do you get? That's how you say. I heard you say.
How do you get roped into?
You met your wife. Like, how does like? You ate suspensions. You had a. Did you? I mean, did you have to get? Tell the whole story. Tell the story.
So
he just shut the door for his old lady not to hear it.
I'm shutting the door for this. My family's just walked back in. It's gonna get obnoxious and loud.
Okay.
So I moved out to California. Jon Fitch and I took I'm gonna give you the long version. Jon Fitch and I took like a Thanksgiving break from our respective colleges after traveling the Midwest meat grinding scene a few times together. And it was Tom Erickson that really helped this all out. Tom and Gary, who John knew. So we got introduced to Zinkin Entertainment, you know, brought us to AKA. We stayed and slept on Bob Cook's floor for like a good 5-day period, and then came back to the Midwest, went back to our universities, and talked and separately decided, hey, that's where we're going when we're done. So he graduated. I was getting sick of school. So I took about another 6 or 7 months after into my like 5th year of college. I lost my 3rd year. We can get into that later if you want, but that was when I got into a fight with a hockey player. So I lost like my whole 3rd year, academically and athletically. So my 5th year, I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm done. And I just moved out to California. So Fitch was already there. And we all got brought down to Mexico. I'd been there numerous times. And so I kind of became like, at a time I was kind of, besides Bob, I was AKA's like de facto matchmaker, finding fights. Because I'd done such a good job, as the reason I'm on this podcast, 50 plus fights. I had 40 of those before I moved to California. So I knew how to find fights, and a lot of them ended up being international and out of state. So we got down to Mexico. I'd fought for this promoter a couple times. I'm booked with Shannon, and Bob just says, don't get leg locked, you'll be fine. So sure enough, I get in a position, go wrong knee on belly on purpose because it was something we'd worked on a little bit. And Shannon rolls and gets onto that heel, and I end up slipping out, and I finished him, but he tapped verbally like 3 times before the ref stopped it. So the ref is now announcing for the UFC, like the Spanish version of the UFC, that Victor Davila fella. And he just didn't want the main event type thing to end. He's like, no, you can't already. You haven't even really been hit. But just like the smell of an elbow coming down. Tap, tap, tap.
He questioned his heart. It's incredible.
So he
up until you started throwing elbows, Shannon was winning that fight.
Of course, he almost had me heel hook. He's serious. He's a tough dude. He really is a pretty tough guy. And I know where you got the 3rd fight from. We were booked for a fight. We'll get into that. So I ended up finishing the fight. The referee kind of had a bit of a laugh. Like, I couldn't stop it on the first one. It was too fast, you know? It was only the first round. Well, Shannon fought like 2 days later in Texas. So that didn't make me feel great. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I won the wrestle, but did my striking really win the fight, or could that wrestle have continued had he decided to go for it fully and live or die today? So that's where I have like three judgments of Shannon. Like, as a human, like, and a guy, I love him. Like, he cracks me up. I love him. Right? And then the other side is like, the other extreme opposite is philosophically, I just can't get on board because he won't live or die right there that day. You know what I mean? Like as a sportsman, it's not like today matters more than anything else.
No, he needs to go to the next event to get that check.
Yeah, exactly.
So then that's where I find that middle ground where there's that bit of respect and a bit of, okay, fair enough. Like he just wants to make a living from this sport and he'll compete every weekend, right? And he's never going to do the whole live or die thing. So we'll never be on the same page there. But wrestling taught me that. You know what I mean? Like it was just, he's got that self-preservation situation going on, which I totally understand that too, because I didn't fight like Mike Tyson either. You know what I mean?
You know, that's an old boxing mentality. We got the guys who would just be the perennial losers who would go in there. Reggie Strickland, he's 85 and 270. And just fighting every weekend and making. That is. It's a boxing mentality.
Yeah, but Reggie never he's only been finished less
he doesn't
than
get
15
finished.
times.
He's going the distance because if you go the distance, you can't fight the next week in boxing. You get a 30, 90, 60-day suspension. That's why you never stop Reggie. He goes out to the first round, he tries, and if you start to crack him, he's done for the fight. He'll do 8 rounds just moving and grabbing your butt.
He was impossible to hit. I respect Reggie Strickland.
I fought him.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Did you?
Yeah,
that's cool.
That's a whole different go, So so I just have those 3 little shades of Shannon. Like I can chat with him for hours. You know what I mean? If he was doing a
how
podcast,
did you make your wife through him?
I'd be in line. Well, the second time I fought him properly was in California. I had signed that fight a long time beforehand. My original opponent fell through 2 weeks out. And on the other side, I had the IFL coming to town, and Frank Shamrock had a team, and I was with Frank at the time. So we put together a team, and I was supposed to go up and fight what would have been Joe Dirksen on Carlos Newton's team.
That dude's badass.
It was going to be a hell of a fight. Yeah, I was nervous for that. I kept the Shannon fight. It wasn't supposed to be Shannon, but I kept this fight against what was supposed to be a younger up-and-coming guy, thinking I'll get through that. 2 weeks later, I'll fight Dirksen, right, for the IFL. So I get up there. It turns into Shannon Ritch. The Athletic Commission had that Armando Garcia, the corrupt cop guy that was giving away tickets and using his position to ingratiate himself. Probably fell under that emoluments clause that Trump's falling under. And he ended up sanctioning the Shannon Ritch bout, knowing I've already beat him and seeing the 2 records. Like Shannon's now 38 years old. I'm like 26, getting better. He's on probably the downhill side. But he still lets the match go. So I clown and play a bit Muhammad Ali. I backed up against the cage and waved him in at one point. He was trying to stay really long and throw kicks, and I chased him a bit and stood in the center of the ring and gave him this one, come on. And I ended up doing a cartwheel guard pass, taking his back at some stage and getting that Tony Fricklin, big cup in the back, big arch. I wasn't fully under, locked in on a choke, but I was under his neck. So he was banana shaped and he tapped. Before I even got out of the cage, Armando Garcia snapping at me, hand in my face, blah, 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 blah. Apparently he was over in the corner yelling at Frank Shamrock saying he better start fighting. I don't know what he's doing in there, kind of thing. Now, I literally walked out to this fight with a female bodybuilder in a dress and high heels with a 6-foot chain around my neck, Rampage-esque, but she's pulling it. I came out with my hoodie on. I hadn't shaved. I had Freak on a Leash is my walkout song in San Francisco. And she's dragging me out. And I'm grabbing the chain, yelling no, trying to stand my ground. And she give it a big yank and I'd stumble forward. And we had a big laugh. Now we're in San Francisco. So from the cheap sheets, it doesn't look like it's even a female. It looks like a man. She was 205 pounds of solid muscle.
Ooh.
Yeah, competitive. We met her alongside Jay Cutler at an event for a protein supplement company, and she had her own stand. She was the female Jay Cutler.
Would you be interested in?
So it was. Do you want some protein, boys?
Oh man.
So again, just setting the scene because at San Francisco it was funnier. I wouldn't have done this back in Indiana. I'd have got lynched, but in San Francisco it was a bit hilarious.
Yeah.
So I'm having a laugh with the whole thing. I go out and I'm loose and playful, and then this guy suspends me indefinitely. So I couldn't go fight for the IFL. I had a good contract, a good pay wicket, and I had some tough fights coming up that would have got me to the UFC earlier if I just performed to my capabilities. So it was a bit of a heartbreak. I turned down a fight in Australia for XFC beforehand because I had all this in place. And when it all fell apart, I wrote Justin Lawrence of XFC and said, hey, have you found anyone for that fight? I think I can take it. And I ended up going to Australia. I slept in the gym for 2 months and had 2 fights. I was showering out of a cold hose every night. And yeah, just roughing it. But it gave me time to reflect and realize, like, young, dumb college kid lost his college scholarship, you know, and that couple months actually set me on a really good path. And as I kind of joked and alluded to before, a couple years later, I met my wife over here, and here I am settled and staying here. So yeah, Shannon Ritch, like, roundabout way, thank you. It was fun and it was cool, but it was heartbreaking and it sucked, but it led to somewhere pretty good.
Good and healthy. Well, I think Shannon also publicly stated that, it was a fixed fight. We were just goofing around in it. I think that's what also kind of sank, like, that boat, you know, so to say.
Well, if he said that, I don't think it was any time around the time that we were being questioned by the commission. But yeah, thanks for that, Shannon. Rub one off.
I might be wrong. I might be wrong. But I
need one of those losses to be a no contest all of a sudden.
Hey, let me ask you, Brian. So clearly you met your wife after that time period where you were hosing yourself down out of a sink, right?
Yeah, I didn't meet any girls.
How odd.
I was sleeping in a gym in an industrial part of town, in a small town. Like, the cities were north and south of me. Like, I was in middle of nowhere. Kankakee.
Yeah.
Right? Kankakee. The college town down south and the city up north was not easy to get to. So yeah, I was just training, sleeping in a gym, training for a while. And I ended up coming back to Australia with the hopes of working for Justin Lawrence and another company in real estate and going around selling investment properties. And I ended up getting a fight offer and a job offer as a coach on the other side of the country when I did come back. And that just seemed a bit more fun than real estate. So that's where I ended up getting, like, my 2 or 3 year working visa. And that was, like, the big latch for me to be able to make a go of staying overseas.
Now, you also fought UFC Hall of Famer Stephan Bonnar earlier in your career.
Yeah.
Would you mind reminiscing about that?
I hate that building, man.
The Hallman Civic Center. Chris, that's our home, brother.
It is the coolest venue for fights. I just effing hate the place because I couldn't win a fight there. I had Adrian Serrano beat and took a bad shot and got rear naked choked. You know what I mean? Didn't even know how to defend one back then. But it was frustrating. And then with Stephan, fought one good round with him, boxed a lot. And he was meant to be a Golden Glove boxer and a jiu-jitsu guy. He was a fair bit bigger than me, and he still is. So it was supposed to be like a 4-man tournament. And second round, I shot a double leg, took him down. He guillotined me. I tapped because I knew I was too tired to get out of it. Like, that wasn't going to work. And he had good jiu-jitsu, so I didn't fall asleep and die on my shield that day. And I vowed to myself, like, never again. And I've never been guillotined since. But, yeah, like, again, one of the ones where when you go toe-to-toe with the guy that ends up getting to the UFC, doing what he did with Forrest Griffin, you know, like, and I think I had my time in Australia, sleeping in that gym and being able to kind of have a hard word with myself because I was by myself for most of it. As a younger man, I might have looked at it and said, why isn't that me? But at that time, it was like, that could be me. If I just make the right decisions and do the right thing and follow the path, I'll get there. So really cool to see some of these guys you rub shoulders with when they succeed. It just, the rising tide should rise all ships. Just don't have any holes in your goddamn ship.
Did you expect booster right there?
Yeah, did you expect him to get to the levels that he fought at? Did you expect that out of Stephan at the time?
Man, honestly, he's got one of those bodies, and let's bypass USADA and all the stuff that he did later in his career. I met him when he was young. Like, he had no reason to want to enhance anything. That guy was a monster.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what he did, like kettlebells and cardio and this and that, but like just his frame, I would rent that body, take it and fight whoever in the world, and then pay for damages like a rental car and try to hopefully keep the excesses like my profit. Like, let me put my brain in some of these bodies I've seen on these athletes and we'll be good. And he had one of those bodies. So yeah, I think as long as he kept training, like the guy got to train with like Andrei Arlovsky and stuff like that too. Like he had guys around him that had some stuff going on that should have raised his confidence level to go, well, I don't care who I'm fighting, I'll show up.
Yeah.
You know, if you have that kind of confidence, well, you're going to do okay.
Yeah. Now talk about one of the things that Brian, you had a long career. You put in a lot of work,
tell me about it.
A lot of miles and stuff. Do you sometimes worry that the highlight of your career is fighting Dennis Hallman? Because that's a moment that everybody remembers, dude. Speedo Gate.
He made it memorable. He made it
Talk about
memorable.
that whole story. Remind people about it.
Yeah, when did you realize he was wearing like a Speedo for the fight?
He
like,
came
at what
out
point?
and jumped into the middle of the ring in my face. I couldn't help but notice before the fight. He came right out and did this in the middle of the cage. And
but there was but it's like he told you before,
nothing in a locker room?
Or in the locker room, or like, dude, I got a sponsor.
Not the same locker room.
All a surprise. You look out and you're fighting a naked man.
I was in the ring. I was in the cage first.
Yeah, you were there first.
God.
So then he came out and came up the stairs, which I probably didn't notice him come up the stairs. But when he came up, he came straight out, whether he did a little loop or whatever. He went straight to the middle of the octagon and did like a big sideways hamstring stretch. And like,
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
He did like a Cossack, like that Pavel Tatsulin, the kettlebell guy. He did a Cossack from side to side and extended each leg and put his ass to the ground. And
Did you want to talk to him about this? Like, hey, man, let's we've got some problems here. Maybe we don't got to do this today. Can we get you some of the help that you might need?
Like my interesting answer to everyone is I wrestled my whole life. It's not a shock. Like we weighed in naked half the time when we had.
So it didn't bother you at all. It didn't.
We stood in line in tighty whities, like 100 dudes in a row, a single file line going up to a scale. You know what I mean? Like we wore Speedos that, were boner huggers. Like it wasn't the most shocking thing. I'm just sitting there thinking like Frank Shamrock, Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, Marco Huas. List goes on, like of guys that have worn similar. But not quite that bold, and obviously it had been so long since someone had worn it on that big of a stage.
That's true. That's a good argument.
Let me ask you a question. It's a
Joe
classy
Silva
argument.
wore a thong.
But after that, like Hallman obviously was like Dana was pissed at him and stuff like that. Like, did you ever hear what he got paid for that, or like what was he doing? And then the other part of it is that Hallman is a talented dude. If he had been consistent when he wanted to, that guy was a magic dude.
Well, listen, like I'm coming into this fight like. Early in my UFC career, this guy had beat my wrestling coach twice.
In like 20 seconds each time.
And I told you I put him on a pedestal. Like Matt, I couldn't touch Matt in the wrestling room. It was not even a thing. Like he was the strongest human being ever. He had such good technique. Like I couldn't break his posture.
He's disciplined too.
Like he used to throw half Nelsons on me, and I'm flat on my chest. Imagine like that screens the floor. Right? And I'm miming this. So I'd have my hand trapped underneath me with my elbow out half the time with wrist control. He'd throw a half Nelson. This shoulder would end up on this ear. But because this elbow stuck straight out to the side, I can't roll over to my back. I couldn't let him pin me. He was ripping both shoulders apart. Like it was like being full Nelson. It was messed up. Like, Matt, you don't have to run a power half because every half Nelson you have is powerful. Can you please unlock your hands and stop breaking my arm?
No way.
I had another coach that was Russian that was lighter than all of us, but he was like a freak, like sort of MMA interested guy too, and he would just choke us in front headlocks all the time. It's legal. It's your fault. You should get out.
Okay, so
dude, sleeping in the middle of our room. So you wonder why half of us turned out to be MMA fighters. Like, we're in the wrestling, but we're fighting half the time.
All right, so what about the locker room afterward? Was any yelling from Dana or anybody backstage in regards to it? What was their conversation with you?
The first I heard of it was at the press conference. I'm sitting next to Vitor Belfort. So Dana's in the middle, then Vitor, then me. And there might have even been someone to the side of Vitor. I just knew I was outside of Vitor from the middle of the podium. And he started giving away bonuses, and I'm getting a bit hot and like warm and like excited. And he said, knockout of the night goes to Vitor Belfort. And my heart sunk. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I TKO'd him. I thought, shit, man, I threw some mean elbows. People were online, Twitter, calling them elbows and all sorts, right? So I was a bit excited. And it was a bit of a funny ground and pound. Like some of it was loose and limp, and other was a bit Mark Coleman looking. So I was like, oh, come on. And then he says, and I've never given out this bonus before, and I didn't know what he was about to say. I'm still like half sad, but I'm still riding the high of winning. But I'm like, man, that's 50 grand, could change my life. And he says, and this bonus is for getting them god-awful shorts off TV. And my,
all right.
I end up getting that bonus and having a bit of a laugh. And the rest of the press conference, there was a bit stuff going on. And I probably gave that same answer. Like, what'd you think when he came out? I'm like, well, I laughed. Like, I've wrestled my whole life. I've seen that stuff before. We've all peacocked and showboated and had a bit of a play. So good on him. And I go, it's going to be memorable. And sure enough, you know, here we are almost a decade later still talking about it.
Yeah, Chris always talks about, like, that's his biggest remembrance of the training mask. He's like, Chris said that he read that guy's shorts at least 50 times.
Wrong, brother. Wrong, brother. You were telling us the exact time when you could see his junk. Well, like at
2:35.
2:35
in the first round. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. See, you know what's
right there.
I'm in the van heading home from that fight. That was in Philadelphia, and I get a screenshot from one of my friends via like Facebook and text of what, and I didn't know it fully exposed like that. I do remember like chatting like with my coach, like, oh, like you hit him in the nuts or this or that. And I was like, oh, I remember feeling the cup like as I turned down, you know, I remember feeling something hard, but I didn't know it exposed everything. And like, sure enough, it was like windows open, windows closed. So yeah, that the internet and phones and technology sort of made that a frozen living moment.
All right. What about your fight with Hector Lombard?
Hate that guy. What about it?
Strong guy.
Well, everybody we know, aside from being a monster, everybody says Cubans are crazy, and you know he's one among the Cubans. They say he's crazy, so there's got to be a story there. And you're fighting in Australia.
Sure. He went around Australia. Well, here we go. Let's call back to Chris Brown, the Olympian wrestler we spoke of. Chris Brown went out to glove touch, and Hector threw an overhand right and finished the fight.
Really?
So that was never a fight.
No.
And that's a shame because
and that'll take someone like, remember, Chris would have been older. He'd have been 40. So do you really want to fight after that? That's the taste that's left in your mouth, like physically, but also like, fuck these guys. Like, I'm an Olympian. I come out and show some respect. This is martial arts, apparently, and I get this fucking guy.
Yeah.
You know, so not really impressed. He went around heel hooking people and hurting people all the time. Like, I saw like a sparring clip of him at a gym I ended up working at, and I'd seminared for before I ever worked for him. But when I finally settled, and I've seen the clip, and just some guy that's never done anything. You know what I mean? Oh, let's spar. Throws a leg kick, doesn't know what he's doing, and Hector blasts him and pushes him into like glass mirrored sliding doors. Like, oh, you're joking. Yeah. And just pummels him on the ground. Like, what is that? But yeah, so many stories of him hurting people.
Yeah, the story, like, that, you know, people refuse to confirm with me, at least on this show, is that him and Barnett were going back and forth at ATT, and Barnett,
great story,
got him in a heel hook or something like that, and Lombard started screaming, going off, left to go outside. They thought he was just done for the day, and came back in with a baseball bat. He had to be like literally held down so he wouldn't, commit some sort of heinous battery.
Well, I was told that Barnett held him down for a good 25, 30 minutes and tortured him.
Oh, really?
And pissed him off. Yeah, like just said, you think you're tough. Well, what happens when you're the nail on a day? So I heard it was more of a like he emasculated him and held him down and picked on him.
Yeah,
I can see that more.
Barnett coming from Hume, that school does that. They do that. They will.
Barnett's a beast too,
dominate.
man. I can see him holding him down like that.
Yeah, and just to bully
You
a
can't
bully.
stop him.
Barnett would get off on that. I could see it.
Well, I mean, sometimes from what you're telling me,
every school has that guy, right? Every JIT school has that enforcer that's the strong guy that you want to pick on the little guys. Well, let's see what you can do with this.
Yeah.
Grab some rebar and try to bend it.
Remember, you guys are from the Midwest. Remember, Militich had Mark Hansen. You guys remember Mark Hansen?
I don't personally, but
he was like a dude. He was like 280, and he was like the guy they trained with. He was a horse. Never really fought a lot of MMA, but I think he got to 5-0 and then stopped doing it or something. But anyway, he was. Yeah, there's always a secret guy, Barnett. I can see it. The fact is, it's from what you're telling me. Lombard probably deserves an ass kicking every once in a while.
That's what I think it happens.
Yeah.
Barnett's not going to do it just to be a dick. He did it for a reason, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Hey, what about Carlos Newton?
His mouth. Yeah, I'd love to hear the story from him. Joe Rogan should have asked him.
Yeah.
What about Carlos Newton?
Oh man, like highlight of my career in a sense.
Yeah,
like
me too.
I almost retired after that though. I didn't think I was getting in the UFC. They told me they didn't need an American with 13 or 14 losses coming over. I tried to get on UFC 110, which was the first one. Then I tried getting on 127, and that was the message I got back. And in between, somewhere in there, I got offered to go on like the Ultimate Fighter 7 in Vegas, but I couldn't go because I had a fight lined up that weekend, and they wanted me to fly out. We never even got around to the whole who's paying for the flight, this and that. But I stuck with that show, and that was the weekend I did the cartwheel kick and got the knockout. That's went viral, right? So I'm sort of glad I stuck back to do that, and it worked out in the end. But yeah, it was a tough one. Like I just beat a UFC champ, and they're telling me that I can't get in. Like I don't have a chance of getting in. Like, what do you mean? So I fought him in Brisbane. Had a really good camp going into that. And I ended up just making my mind up, like, if I'm going to wrestle, it'll be a takedown, but I'm standing right back up. If I take him down, it's just to show that I can or because it was there, but I don't really – he was so dangerous. He's so good on the ground. I just didn't want to do it. So I got the win, like, kind of just grinding and wrestling and pushing and punching and kneeing. And, I was kind of happy with the performance and had a good chat with him after. But then I was a bit disillusioned. Like, I'm not going to get in. What am I going to do? Like, why don't I just coach? Like, I'll make just as much money coaching and maybe take the odd fight here and there. So I ended up taking a fight in New Zealand, 7-8 months later. But I got to choose my own opponent. So it wasn't like a big dangerous one. It was just, hey, we'd love to have you on the show for your name value to sell some tickets, da-da-da-da-da. It ended up being like a bikey run type show, like gangster run show. Good on them. So they didn't care. They didn't really need to sell tickets. They didn't need me to sell any. So I had one fight and won that one and then got lucky enough to get the call up. But yeah, with Carlos, like I thought, hey, if anything's going to get their attention, beating a champ will. And then when they just were kind of like nonplussed about it, I was just like, man, what do you want me to do? Like,
yeah.
What do you want me to do?
Newton's a nice guy.
I'd fought Kyle Noak. I'd fought Hector Lombard. When I fought Hector, I had to drink probably 2 liters of water, which is almost 4 pounds, and a glass of wine before I got on the scale to get above 77. So
really?
I dropped down to 70 that whole year of 2009.
Man, how difficult was that?
2 years. I was 6 foot, 157, 158. I was waking up at like 168. So I was under the 77 kilo limit waking up. But because I'd fought middleweight up until that point, you know what I mean? Like I never settled even at welter. I went straight from middleweight down to lightweight, being vegetarian, just training my ass off. I was living in the gym in Perth where I coached. I'd sleep upstairs and come down and train all day. I'd wake up at midnight and hit a bag in my underwear so I could save on laundry, like just to have a laugh, but true story.
Wow.
And
so you fought all the way up to heavyweight.
I had to get up above 77.1 to fight him, and he was obviously cutting to 84. But it was the only fight to take. Like, there was no other fight here. I'd already fought Kyle Noak, and then he fought Kyle. And so then it was kind of like, well, I beat Dylan Andrews, who got to the UFC on his own right. So it was like, well, who else is there to fight? Well, Hector.
Wow.
Yeah. Didn't have too many other fights after that, to be honest. Like I beat guys at 93 kilos over here as well. So yeah, after I fought Hector, I got another fight at 77. The guy at least saw, hey, Brian's not invincible. You know what I mean? So he took the fight and I beat him, and then it was kind of slim pickings after that.
So now, like every country's kind of got like a badass, like Lee Murray from, the United Kingdom. You guys, Australia has Ian Schaffa. Is his like reputation like deserved in regards to like what we hear about him?
So I fought Ian, and he was like one of the most respectful guys, like leading into the fight. And I fought him down at like 72 kilos. So this is one of the few fights I got at that lighter weight when I got skinny, right? So respect for him taking that fight, knowing it was going to be a tough one. So we fought, we chatted after. He ended up like interviewing me when I got into the UFC in Sydney. He came up with like another like pretty girl, and they both had this is what we're doing, and it's a blah, 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 raising awareness for this and that. It was kind of like, had like a charitable vibe to it.
That's cool.
And running a website, right? So good stuff. But like, if I go like 6 years before, 5 years before all that, like when I was first in Australia, I saw the guy get into a street fight after a fight show. And we're walking around with like another promoter. Like if I'm around another promoter, like Miguel, you would have saw me at the M1 when I fought for you. Like I'm going to try to be on my best behavior and show him a good guy that I have another opportunity. I want to come back. This guy gets in a bloody street fight with some karate guy, it looked like, because the guy took a pose and like threw some high kicks and was talking about, you don't know who I am, which made Ian laugh, as you do. The guy had a million fights himself. I literally sat down with someone else that was out with us, and me and him like split like some candy bars, and we sat on a sidewalk like it was a movie theater and just watched this surreal street fight happen. Like Ian punched one guy in a suit and knocked him cold, and then had this like protracted, I'm telling you, no less than 12, 15 minutes standoff.
Wow.
Where it was like they would fight a little bit and then they'd get back and talk and like show, like the one guy like,
kind of peacock a little bit.
I'm talking 7 minutes in, this drunk karate guy literally went up to a street sign and like kicked the street sign that was head height. And he goes, you know what I'll do to you? And I'm like, well, we've been watching for 7 minutes and you've only hit it so far.
I haven't done it yet.
You haven't done it quite yet, you know? And they just went at it, and it was the weirdest thing when they finally just walked away. But I'm like, I am not getting in the middle of this. Like, I'm not.
Why?
Not my job.
Yell world, every few seconds, yell world star, and let it go viral.
It wasn't a thing back then, or I would have. But I was being silly and obnoxious. I was like half cornering the other guy. But can you imagine? I'm sitting on a sidewalk in the middle of a big city at like 1 a.m. That's literally just, when I got those candy bars, I was getting like one of those 1-800 phone cards where you scratch off the code so I can call back to the U.S. and talk to my parents. Because I just fought. You know what I mean? Like I just fought like a couple hours before, so I wanted to tell them, how everything went. It was the weirdest thing. The weirdest. And then similar story, I went to Melbourne on one of those, and I coached a kid, and I did the same thing. I'm on my iPhone 3, scratch off card, calling mom. I'm literally talking to my mom, and I got king hit. I got punched by some random guy that came off of like the side of a building and hit me. And then they stood there for like 20 minutes. So finally a cop car came down, and I flagged him, and I go, I'm okay, but that guy hit me like 10, 15 minutes ago for like no reason. The cops went up and talked to him, and they were so drunk. It was so weird. Like the people that were with him were trying to be my friend after, and like they took him to the drunk tank and, do you want to press charges? I said, no, just scare him in the morning. You know what I mean? But yeah, so weird.
Partying in Australia is different than partying in the States.
Some loose cannons over here, I tell you.
Yeah.
You remember the M1 show? Well, what are your thoughts on that? Because that was I don't remember any show I ever did where like the American team versus the Russian team, where the American team came together so kind of like united and happy and stuff, and like it turned out to be some really great fighters there.
It was one of the coolest moments of my career, and I've talked about it as a turning point. So thank you. That was. Get rid of all that real quick. It was awesome. again, to rub shoulders with Chael Sonnen, Justin Eilers, Chat Lavender, like you had a stacked card, but we were a ragtag ass group of just tough dudes, right? They were a team, a real team coming over. So I didn't know until the weigh-ins and medicals when I had to sign off on my commission paperwork. That guy was like 27-3. Yeah, thanks for that.
Well, I didn't know
I
you.
took that one on short notice coming up a weight class. I thought that guy was like 10-1. 27-3, that Alexei Veselazarov.
Yeah, he had a hard name and stuff. And the guy looked exactly like Bustamante, remember?
He was a monster. Like, you talk about that Stephan Bonnar body. That's what I felt. I felt like I was fighting Stephan Bonnar again.
Yeah.
And he was American Kickboxing Academy.
Posture,
So
big wide back.
Yeah.
All right, so
big. I thought I was going to show off my stand-up.
He broke your nose, didn't he?
All these guys were like Russian national karate champions, European taekwondo. And for us Americans, we kind of laughed. Like, oh, these are like taekwondo guys. They train with Fedor, so they're going to grapple a little bit, right? But we all just thought they'd be like Stand and Wang karate guys until we saw the first fight. Ron Faircloth went out and fought a guy that was throwing hammers. And we're like, that's not taekwondo and karate that we know.
Yeah,
So
Eilers got thrown out of the ring, and he landed in my lap. The guy tossed him clear out of the ring in that fight. And I remember Eilers got up and goes, all right, let's go. And he got back and fucking jabbed him to death, man, you know? But we
got serious real quick after that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then the guy you fought was a monster. He went on to have a really good career as well, as did Travis. But,
Trevor Prangley fought Andrei Semenov on that card. It was a good card. It was definitely
it was great. Yeah, that card was off the chain. Like, I'd love to see video. Do you have video of that? Can I get a link somewhere?
Yes, I watched your fight.
I'll
send it to you. I'll send it to you here.
Thank you.
I was going to tell you, I remember you walking in like at 5 a.m. after that fight, like, you know, after fight party with a bottle of champagne. I remember that.
Yes.
Brian.
That was the first time I really met Chael Sonnen and had a good chat with him, like in the in-club nightclub of the venue. And we had a blast. But he was like the nicest guy.
Yeah, the problem with fighting for Miguel on his shows was like you'd fight a guy that was 4-2 and his name would be Joachim Hansen. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, you know, I don't know who he is. You get there, you go, wait a minute, this is deep water. He'd always bring over these Europeans that, like, you didn't know who they were until you saw them fight. And you were like, ooh.
Well, you know what Miguel never did, though? He never went the other way and took like a 1-0 Cain Velasquez and a 2-0 Daniel Cormier over to Europe to bash people.
Yeah,
never did that.
No,
it's one of my favorites there, Miguel.
It's a little hard. I did what I could, guys. But that was a fun show, and I remember Ebersole was probably in one of the grittiest of the fights on that one because I remember the guy broke your nose, and I remember that you got the finish in the third round late.
I got a nice brown gray tooth here from that fight. I thought I was going to lose it between round 2 and 3.
Jesus. All right, so Brian, we play a game called the asshole game. We just throw a name at you. It's yes or no. You got a little thing you want to throw in there with it. I mean, you can. You know, it's up to you. Miguel, why don't you start? We'll do a round robin.
Well, let's go ahead and keep it in Australia. What about the Elvis Innocent guy?
Fuck that guy. Love him. Sweet. He's awesome. So Elvis's school is 4 miles from my house where I'm sitting right now.
Really?
Yeah. Now, I probably could have worked for Elvis had I not worked for another gym first. There's a guy that's up the road from Elvis that I've known for like 12 years, and I ended up working for him. And I didn't want, when I quit, I didn't want to go right over to Elvis's and be part of the competition. So I'm at my own gym now, like a good 20 miles away. But Elvis is a great dude. He's always been open-armed. He's definitely in it for the greater good of the sport. Like, you can see him really trying to grow Aussie MMA and like doing the right thing. And he's got a huge academy. It's awesome. Like, I love the floor space he's got in the setup. But yeah, like he's really proud of that role of like Australian pioneer. You know, he was the first guy in the UFC And I think he's represented himself as a martial artist really well.
Very well.
And really is a good guy for that spot. You know what I mean? Like he's not on social media being grumpy or weird or anything like that, you know? So yeah, he's definitely a good figurehead for Australian MMA.
All right. So I'm going Travis Fulton.
I don't know one way or another. I've only met him twice. Of all the fights we had, I'd only met him twice. Same with Jeremy Horn. I met like Jeremy 3 times.
Okay.
Now those guys, but some of those, those got to be those old school shows though from the Midwest. You got to have seen some type of disaster story from those shows back then. You could share with us or something.
Come on.
Well, I never fought on an extreme challenge for Monty. Right?
That's what I was going to ask you about mine.
But I did corner a fighter up there. I took my college roommate with no major experience at all, like a couple fights, and he fought Tim Sylvia and gave him a decent time at like an outdoor cage event.
Damn.
You know, Tim had to work for that. Tim was like 15-0 at this time and already beaten Cabbage Carrera in Hawaii. He was coming off that.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, my roommate did all right. Had he been half Mike Russo, he'd have probably murdered him.
Yeah.
But Tim obviously closed up those holes on takedown defense and whatnot before he got to the UFC. But there were a couple mismatches on that show. I'll leave it at that. Like, it was a great outlet and a platform, but fuck, there were some dudes that were just fed to monsters.
I always like it when you go onto some of those shows and you'd be like, okay, I'm fighting, and the 3 judges are Jeremy Horn, Matt Hughes. It was all Monty's guys with the judges.
Probably Lawler referee.
Yeah.
Let me share a little story with you, Brian, just to get your stories flowing here, because I know you've seen too much in your fights, man.
I forgot most of it, honestly.
Yeah, we had a crew of guys come from Panama to fight here in Costa Rica. 3 dudes on the team. None of them bought a cup. So they bought one and shared it.
Yeah.
They would take it out right at ringside, hand it to the other guy. The other guy would put it in right at ringside. I was like, man, I'm just glad I've never seen that before or never saw it again. But I mean, you see weird things, man, in those old school shows.
That happens a lot.
How about Australia, though?
I had a kid go to his first martial arts tournament. You know, he just started training kickboxing. We're not the most formal. We don't have like the Century Martial Arts little bag, you know what I mean? Of like hand shields, kick shields, ... So he shows up, no mouthpiece, no cup. But you signed up for kickboxing. You know what I mean? So we had to send him out to like a rebel sport to get a mouthpiece, but he couldn't find a cup. They were out. So I had like 3 guys that day sharing a cup, going in the back behind the bleachers, changing, coming back, behind the bleachers, coming back. I was introduced to the Muay Thai Cup, the metal one, at the Revolution show that Brian Foster and Kevin Randleman headlined. That's where I met Jon Fitch. So Jon Fitch fought Mike Pyle, and I fought a guy from Canada up there. John had to borrow a cup.
That's crazy.
Wow. He borrowed a metal Muay Thai cup, and we had to figure out how to tie it. Like, it was awkward.
Yeah. I remember Nick Thompson did a weigh-in in one of those.
Yeah, Nick Thompson is on my list.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a funny duck. Fought him as well. He's a funny fella. He's a lawyer now.
Yeah.
He's a lawyer now.
Well, he's been for a while, but yeah, that's what he's doing. That's awesome.
And I got a tip for you. If we were doing an over-under on his weight, take the over on 220.
I mean, I'm dad bod too. Yeah, dang. I would have guessed.
What about Jason Guida?
No comment.
Damn, I got one. I knew I would get one. I knew I would get it, Miguel. I told you.
No comment. I can't do it. I got to be diplomatic. I love Clay.
All right, there we go.
I love Clay. Me and Clay.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Me and Clay coming out.
Huh?
Your turn.
All right. What do you got on Joe Silva there?
Joe Silva.
Yeah.
Oh, that's mixed, right? Like, mixed. Like, he was pretty good to me. Like, I sort of got to tell him when I was ready to fight, and it always happened. There was never a time where he strung me along, like, hey, I'll be ready in April, and then he didn't give me a fight till September. You know what I mean?
Know, you talked about it and be like, yeah, we're not going to use you because, with that voice, how you've lost too many or something. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Like, really? Yeah.
Wow.
But I wasn't.
Looks like I'm the only one with one on this one. All right, Miguel,
I wasn't working with him then, right? So fair enough. Like that was his judgment. But once I got in and he had to work with me, I guess he treated me fair.
Okay.
Still winning, Chris.
I shot myself in the foot. I went 4-0, and then I spent a week in Vegas doing the expo after my fourth fight in New Jersey. I came back and did the expo in Vegas.
Yeah.
And me and my wife were there, and drinking and eating and doing the thing. And then I saw that this kid lost his opponent at welterweight, and I went, I want in. Just being greedy. I should have just left it alone. And I went and lost like a split decision. So, had I won that fight, which I should have, had it been 5-0, then I'd have been sitting there going, all right, now Joe Silva owes me something.
Yeah.
And then I could have judged him. Like that question, I could have said, based on that answer, did he help me as a 5-0 athlete, or did he hold me back? Yeah. But as it went, I'm 4-1, and then I just kept my career going and, finished out doing my thing. And he treated me fair. But all the other stuff from all the other guys coming out, I can see it very much as true, because I've seen some emails and I know some people that fought, and I know their story, and it's not always the nice side. Like there's no negotiating with them. I didn't get to negotiate a second contract or a third contract and get anything out of them. It was, no, this is what we're doing. Like I came in on 6,000 and 6,000, like with 50 fights, 60 fights, 65 fights. I said, come on, you guys are paying Hector Lombard like 120 and 110, like to win. Like, what do you mean? Went 4 rounds with the guy. Like I've just beat a UFC champion.
Yeah, there's not much negotiation with them. There never has been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like come on. So,
all right, so you spent time in California,
but I can't hold him to account for that. He was doing his job. So
yeah.
All right, so you spent time in California, which kind of opens up the playing field. What about Frank Shamrock?
Oh, love him.
Oh,
I owe him so much. I can never pay him back.
What about Ken Shamrock? What about Ken?
Don't know him.
Oh, really?
Probably an asshole. No, never met him.
What about crazy? Talk about Crazy Bob, because
Crazy Bob.
I always used to love calling him up. I always used to call him by his formal name, which is Deranged Robert.
Yes, yes. So I was the same way for a long time. Me and Bob had a lot of chats and a lot of times, and I'm glad I had someone. He was a good mix of soft and hard. And I at that time I probably needed that coming out of college, having not been able to wrestle my last couple of years, and just being not totally wayward, but you know what I mean? Like just trying to catch on in this sport and make something of it. And I got to sleep, in a 5-bedroom house and share it with him and Josh Thompson, Pat Minahan. He gave me a job at a bar. I was, digging ditches and cleaning up. I was cleaning up roof tiles from Mexican guys that were doing skilled work. I was like the antithesis to the stereotype. But I owe him a lot. Like he gave us as much as he could. You know what I mean? Like he was raising 2 kids that he was sharing custody with. He was trying to manage all these fighters. He knew he was on the brink of something big. Frank was there and it ran and did its thing. And now they're trying to recruit all these young guys. And I couldn't pay him or Javier or Frank for the time they gave me. So
you have your Mendez.
Yeah,
good dude, huh?
Yeah. Like but you were there like before they got the Cormier and stuff, or was Cormier hanging around the background? Did you ever get to grapple with those guys?
No,
or is it really modernized?
So that's all modern for me. Like when I was there, I flew out to Buffalo to train Josh Koscheck with him for his first fight. So I booked that fight. It was in Colorado, and it was me, Josh, and Mike Kyle on that card that I was able to get fights for. Had a great trip. Went 3-0. And then Josh ended up moving out before I left, but he didn't come train with us, really. He stayed down in Fresno near Zinkin, the manager. And because he was a 4-time All-American wrestler, and Zinkin was big in the wrestling with Fresno State, and his family had money. His dad was wealthy, and he's a lawyer and all that stuff, right? So he ingratiated himself down there and was doing just private lessons to make a living. and then training martial arts down in Fresno. And after about a year or so, moved up to San Jose when they knew he was going to be able to support himself with his fight persons. So he had a nice entry into the whole California scene. I left with Frank when Frank opened his first gym on his own. And 3 weeks later, all the boys were on airplanes to go to the Ultimate Fighter 1.
Man.
So there were like 5 of them going. And then Jon Fitch got called at the last minute and his bags got taken off. He was on the plane, bags loaded, sitting down. They pulled him off the plane. He didn't know why. It wasn't until he got a phone call and got in that, the UFC's decided not to put you on the show.
Wow.
So Jon had to deal with his fair share of fuckery as well. You know what I mean? Like, and he stayed the path. He was a level-headed guy.
We'll get to Jon.
Did the right thing.
We'll get to him. Trust me. Well, he'll be on here, and that asshole game is going to be phenomenal with him.
Yeah. He'll have something to say.
Well, by the way, Brian, I would like to thank you for giving me a couple things. Not only my last loss in MMA, but also this big ass scar on my forehead from one of the last. It was about a minute left and 30 seconds. I can't remember, but an elbow hit me. And,
I didn't want to deal with no judges if I didn't have to. Man, and thank you. That was one hell of a day.
Yeah, man.
To be able to come in and fight a legend, like I was riding high. Like a lot of guys would shrink a little bit, but I'm like, man, I finally got my chance, and I'm fighting someone good. Like
you shine, man. It was good, man. I didn't like that fight to be honest. Like, man, this is a way tougher fight than anybody realized. It's going to be a bitch. You know what I mean? So it's fun though. You know, at least we won the fight of the night, made it good. So
that's it. And you went on and smacked another couple guys around. So
I only had one fight after that, man. One more.
That's cool, though.
Retirement fight.
I remember that. That's just I can't watch fights like that. I hate watching guys when I know both guys, man. It's just like it's like, you know, I don't want to. I
got to root against somebody, and if I don't want to root against somebody like this, sucks. I like both guys. You know?
Yeah. Well, I got to do the same thing in a few weeks. I don't know if you guys know that Wimp to Warrior program that they've got. You guys heard of that? It's a 20-week season where they take just average people and they pull them in, they train them for 20 weeks, and they have a fight at the end. It's not really about the fight. It's about, you know, people that used to be athletes that miss it, people that aren't very, you know, stand up for themselves type people, like people that are overweight, come in and lose a bunch of weight. And there's this big, like, Biggest Loser type feel at the end of it, you know, and a lot of emotion goes into it. There's got, you know, I want to quit, and dot, 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 dot. And if it's a good season, the team helps keep everything together, and so do the coaches. We've had the COVID thing happen right in the middle of the season that I was helping coach for another guy. There's another guy here that's got, you know, 45 fights in Aussie MMA. And I teach wrestling at his school once a week, John Levin, about 40 minutes up the road from me. So he's brought me in like early morning workouts, right? The whole thing is like you get up at 5 a.m. 5 days a week. And just show your commitment and show up, and you're tougher than most, right? So they've had COVID hit and they've lost some numbers, and now there's like not good matches in the room because they usually fight someone in the same season in the room. So I got to bring some of my athletes that haven't had fights yet that eventually want to and bring them over. And I'm like, man, just let me referee because I train them both. I train these guys a couple days a week, 3 days a week. I train these other guys 3 days a week, and now I gotta watch them fight. So I'm like, let me referee and at least like keep it fair and keep it clean. I go, I don't want to corner either side, and I can't just sit back and watch because I'll bite down to the nubs. You know what I mean? Watching those.
That's cool. And that's on TV in Australia, like mainstream channel, big TV channel stuff. Because
no, so they run like a proper show usually around it, which generates 500, 600, 700 people in a venue. But we can't even do that. So this one's actually going to be, we're just going to do like a sparring day in the gym, but we're going to do it still with the same equipment. The 6-ounce MMA gloves, the shin pads, and just let them play. And obviously not call it like it's a title fight. Like, hey, the guy has to be really down and out and slumped before we call it.
Right.
So, I'm gonna have that same experience of like, oh, I gotta watch two people I really like, and I want both of them to be happy, but
Yeah. But so how do you like matchmaking? Because I used to matchmake and stuff like that. And it's got to me, I always chop it up to, and you're a people person. It's like you just gotta have an active Rolodex and then be creative.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about adjusting to the Australian scene and getting to know the guys there.
Well, I traveled a lot and coached a lot, which helps. I've done some seminars and stuff like that, and that's a big help. So I know someone in every city, but you know how it goes when you can only sell 700-800 tickets. You got to have locals, and sometimes bring people in. So the interstate spots are a bit limited, but I've had a good time with it. It's really nice to see guys with a good platform. And again, XFC's been running forever, like 2003.
That's wild.
So they really have been the show that a lot of the good guys have run through. We had another show, CFC, where I fought Hector Lombard, and I fought like Dylan Andrews, right? And there were a couple other guys that had fought. Robert Whitaker fought on that show a couple times, and that's where they had like the big fights, on that show. And they had the money to do it. They had a big venue, and good ticket sales. A lot of tables were sold. They'd sell like 30 tables.
Jesus.
Which is where you pay for your food and your alcohol plus the ringside experience. So it's a good wicket. But when that kind of fell under, it went back to XFC, kind of being the big show. And now a couple other shows are stepping up. We have a show on Fight Pass here in Australia, which is good for the athletes. But yeah, my only difficulty is like when guys they put their finger in and then they pull it out. They dip their toes in, then they pull it out. And it's like, you said you wanted to fight. It's 10 weeks away. I've offered you 3 guys. Like, and it has to go through the coach, then to the athlete back to the coach, back to me. And it's like,
takes forever,
I get into
man.
these long conversations sometimes where just a yes or no is all I want, man. But, you like you said, you got to massage people and you got to let them come to their own decisions and whatnot. But I just need firm answers. And sometimes there's a lot of like gray area kind of conversations. And I'm like, man, I'm trying to plan a show.
Yeah, and you're trying to
only go with your yes or your no. I can't do with like maybes suck.
Yeah, and you worry, pretty much about the sport, kind of like the way I did too. So what you do, so you got to do it, and if it is a yes, then you enter into a whole new ballgame where they kind of got to feel like it's fair, and you're not bringing them in to get beat, and
that's
the
it.
whole everything, right? So you can't be a dick getting to there.
Yeah. I'm not going to ruin my reputation just to put on a fight because I need one more fight. Like,
no,
I really need one more fight.
It's not worth it.
But I'm not doing that. There's
no.
other people that have done it and that are doing it, and
I
don't like it. And other people tell me they don't like it. But then there's also that part of, but they still go and fight on those shows.
Brian, you got to look at it
Brad
this way.
Kohler and Jamie Levine are terrible, but they fill fight cards every goddamn month. Like.
So,
yeah,
how does that happen?
The thing is, like, you can't ask somebody to do something that you yourself wouldn't do. And Brian, I mean, you drove to, God knows where in Minnesota for $500. So, like, you've really done things that most people wouldn't do, and for it to, break that threshold, it's like, it's got to be bonkers. Like, you can't.
Well, it's different too. Like, I don't want to say the guys over here are entitled. But like Australia is a bit of a wealthier country. Like people make good money over here, and it's hard almost to motivate them to do it just for the love of sport. So like coming from wrestling, even if I played basketball, you're just there to be on the team and to be on the court. If you don't do something right, you're not on the court. And the whole motivation was to play. You could be the best guy on the team, but if you're a jerk, your coach will sit you down if you have a good coach. Or here, you can just change gyms. You're paying the $120 a month to train. You just change gyms.
Now you talked about that a little bit. Maybe just you said you feel like maybe the people there are entitled over. I think that's just a different generation of people. I think it's everywhere, to be honest with you, because like you're saying, when we were doing this at the beginning, everybody in the sport liked the sport. They were all about the sport because there wasn't money or fame or all that stuff involved with it. If you were doing it for money, you weren't very good at math or you weren't very smart because there wasn't there. You know what I mean? So people love the sport. It's changed. I mean, since it became mainstream, like you're saying, I don't think people have the same mentality as people like us used to. Or maybe those kids in general just don't have it. Maybe that's what it is.
Chris, it was like the guys that would fight for the money would be like, yeah, I'm not fighting unless, and they would give a ridiculous price. But they would just be in the gym and never fight. And it was just like, man, you're kind of faking your way through here to where
100%.
You two were just, all right, $200, man, screw it. I got to get something in.
Yeah, like you got guys now that want to get paid and they don't want to sell tickets. And it's like, but how do you think we make our money? Like, I don't have sponsors. Like over here, there was a pretty good time where it seemed like a lot of like the biker gangs, like not Hell's Angels, but different named ones.
The clubs.
Were sitting front row. They wear their patched up clothing, sit front row. Where in the U.S. it's so different. Like, I didn't know bikers were like a real thing. Yeah. It was a movie thing. I didn't know. Yeah, I was naive.
From like Southern Illinois. What do you mean you didn't know?
Man, it's not as prevalent. When I got to Canada, I was surprised in Canada how much
from Southern Illinois
they ran though.
I never saw it. I never went to a Chicago Blackhawks or a Chicago Bulls game and saw 5 bikers with their patches on watching the game.
But you've been to like a crash up derby in Kankakee, and they had to have been there.
I never noticed, bro. Being serious. When I came over here and I saw them wearing their patches, sitting front row, watching kickboxing or MMA, I was shocked. I was like, don't you guys dress normal and not wear that?
Well, there's a few things that have taken place since then. What was that biker show where come on, man. It was a huge TV program, Sons of Anarchy. See, you have moved to Australia post Sons of Anarchy. They're everywhere now.
No. That happened while I was here.
Right.
Yeah. I was already here. So I'd already finally seen him in the flesh in 2007.
Yeah, Mike, I think in the States.
I was 26 years old before I realized bikers were like a thing, like real. and that they grabbed like tons of marijuana in vans and drove them across the country. Like, I didn't know.
Psychedelics too.
Yeah, probably. All of it. I didn't realize that was like a thing. I thought like the mafia had sort of been like dismantled back when like Rudy Giuliani did his thing and the Chicago mob had like killed themselves off. I didn't realize it wasn't just Italian guys trying to run brothels and gambling dens. It was definitely interesting over here.
You said brothels.
I gotta say, Brian, I'm happy for you right now, man. You're in Australia. You're living a dream, because I've been there 3 times, and it's honestly I've been able to travel all over the place. It's one of my favorite places to go to, man. I mean, I've always went down to, and when we were in Sydney, I went to Bondi Beach and Manly Beach.
Yep.
I took those ferries. Man, I just loved it. Just had a bunch of fun over there, and one of my favorite places to go to. I'd like to go back at some point. I don't know when, but I'll definitely make it through there at some point.
You let me know, and let me see if I can put you in a couple of gyms for a few hours and see if the trip will pay for itself.
Hey, that's a good seminars. I love it. It's a good idea.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure,
cool.
I got a question for you. How far are you from Nimbin?
I am actually driving that way next week. I'm going to go and see one of my old students that runs a gym. I think I've got like 5 former students from when I first came over and had a bit of a team in Perth. I've got like 5 students that have their own gyms.
Wow,
so I'm
nice.
going to go see one of my first generation students, and I'm taking some of my students from here. And one of them I think is going to end up being a coach himself. So it's going to be really interesting letting him meet the version of himself that's 12 years down the line. You know what I mean?
That's
and
awesome.
vice versa.
Nimbin,
I'm like, hey, mate, that kid's you 12 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, get his ear, have a chat with him.
For those who might not be aware, Nimbin is a location.
Hippie capital of Australia.
Yeah, you could get a little bit of marijuana there at a store.
We're going to be about an hour and a half away from there.
Sounds like you could jog it.
Yeah. Oh, we're driving, man. It's like an 11-hour drive from Sydney. It's going to be a haul.
That's good.
But
Man.
I want to get out and do something. We've been locked down, man. So I can't cross state borders. So it's still barely within our state.
Wow.
Are they really setting up roadblocks? Are they setting up roadblocks like that?
Yeah. The borders are shut. Can't cross the borders.
What happens if you work on the other side? Like, what happens if your job?
I think there's not too many towns like that where it's really 2 towns across the border, but they've figured out some sort of border pass where, you know, you can go across. But they've had some dramas, like people in palliative care, their sons and daughters haven't been able to go 30 minutes across the border to see them. Yeah. Babies can't go see your grandkid.
How bad is the death rate over in Australia?
We've been really lucky. Like New Zealand and us, geographically, probably was the biggest bit. We didn't really have a huge bite, like a first, like ground zero. We actually had people get off like a cruise ship that caused a problem. Had it not been for that cruise ship, I think we'd have been fine over here.
So essentially what you're saying is that you guys are participating in the overreaction Olympics, much like us?
I can't go there. I can't say, because there are a lot of people that have recovered but are still suffering like the effects. So it's not like you get it and die or you get it and you're healthy. There's a lot of people getting it and like having what's going to be chronic lung infections for the rest of their life. So like it's rough.
Wow. The strains in different areas of the world aren't even the same. Like the strain in India, it doesn't even look like ours. So, I mean, I'm being a little facetious with it, but the strain here in the United States, I mean, has it affected people? Of course, but like I think aspirin and the flu have killed more people over over a course of a year than COVID.
Well, that's the thing too. Like you get,
and that's not me diminishing like the people that have died, but that's just
yeah.
I think part of the big political bit too is like someone was on Tom DeBlass's Facebook the other day and was like, I don't know anybody that's had it. And it's like, well, congratulations, and I hope it stays that way. And I didn't say that, but someone else did. But there's other people going, I know 5 people that have died in my hometown.
Yeah.
I have a guy that manages my property. I have a property back in my hometown that I rent out. And the guy that manages knows like 7 people that have died in my hometown from it. And I'm like, man, or between my hometown
what's happening with us is like that onion is starting to unpeel, and a lot of the deaths that have happened that have been ruled COVID, they're kind of taking them away from that.
Yeah. So I know a stat came out saying like, 6% of the COVID reported deaths were COVID. Well, you dig into that, and the report I read was 6%. The guy had no comorbidity. Like they got COVID and they died of COVID. The other one was like the guy had diabetes. COVID came along, spiked the diabetes, caused the death. Like
it could have been poor health. Yeah, and it is serious.
There's a lot of slice of, it's never the two sides. Like again, recover or die. There's a lot of slices of that pie, and then the same with the deaths. Like what caused it? Well, COVID was like kind of the multiplying effect maybe for someone that had something else going on, but they could have lived with that else going on for 20 years or 15 years, whatever. But it's been shit, and watching people argue on the internet over it and all that, and tearing families and communities apart. It's been rough. It's like, man, just calm down, do your part, go about your day. Like we don't all need to have like a social commentary channel, you know? Like I see fighters and promoters and matchmakers. I don't see any doctors here, so I think we can probably wrap up on this one. And Brian, I'm going to invite you back for a part 2 at some point because it's still too much. I do got one closing question, and then we'll see what Chris and Mike got to close. But tell me a story about a time that you went, fought, and they didn't pay you, because had to happen.
Everyone's got one.
Everybody's got I didn't get paid. So go back into the vaults and let me know if you remember one.
So this links back up to that story we were chatting about, not being entitled, but a different generation, right? Kids now see their big out and their big payday as, hey, when I get big, this and that, I'm going to get a cut of like the pay-per-view. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like when people think of that and you say cut of the pay-per-view, they think like John Jones, right? They think Conor McGregor. Well, I got a cut of pay-per-view once for a fight in Minnesota with Brad Kohler. And he was pretty happy to tell me that in 8 to 12 weeks when the pay-per-view shuts that he'll send me a check. Well, there was never a pay-per-view. So I fought for piddly percent of 0 and got paid 0. But thankfully I won. Yeah. But got paid 0. And that
you actually got paid according to the contract, though.
Listen,
to be fair,
in my career, I have fought. It was a verbal contract.
Those are the best ones in court.
Pay-per-view. I can knock that off my bucket list. I fought for a percentage of a pay-per-view once.
Do you think we could get Brad Kohler on here?
I appreciate that.
I'd love to get him, man. I love that.
Yeah,
He's had 50,
he's a little.
He's had 50 fights, but they were all after his own show when people were coming to get their paychecks.
Well, there was a guy, and I know we're wrapping this up. There was a guy, Mike Riley, that actually had the Boston Crab as one of his finishes. Yeah. And I mean, talk about fixed fights. I mean, I'm not going to say it was, but all you got to do is watch it.
Yeah, you basically got to roll over for the guy.
Yeah.
You get caught in one of those.
All right, Brian, always a pleasure, brother. Man, hopefully
guys.
I'll see you at the Hammond Civic Center again.
May.
I don't think so.
Listen, you get me one going out fight, and I'll take it.
Good, my man. Be good, brother.
Yes, sir.
Good seeing all your faces.
Thank you, guys.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.